You need to become aware whenever a pain appears in your body, what has happened over the last few days? Has there been an emotional altercation of some sort that has brought this pain, that is responsible for this pain? I mean, I say this pain, it could be anywhere in your body. Yeah. Muscular pains do not come out of nowhere. And this is how we learn. So we learn to become more savvy about our emotions. Hi. Today I'd like to link emotions to the human body. And we need to recognize that a human being should be able to experience all the different emotions. But we don't. Some of the emotions we have suppressed because they are experienced by us as in they're too intense to be experienced, so they get shunted sideways and they go into the unconscious part of our psyche. And there may be two reasons for this that I'm aware of. One is because the intensity is too strong in our bodies, and the only way to survive the experience is to suppress it. The other one is because we are brought up with a belief that we should not behave that way, or is being suppressed in us externally. Like if you become explosively angry, too reactive, then someone may punish you for that. And now you've got the fear of the loss of love from one of your parents as a result, for the sake of argument. And now you learn to suppress yourself. You learn to control that particular emotional expression. Either way, the result is the same. It goes to the end of the cupboard. And as Jung would say, it becomes part of your shadow, which is that part of our psyche which is out of our awareness, but then becomes expressed in our environment. And in a way, this is part of our learning process. We've all come into this world for the purpose of learning how to manage being in a physical body, being in this body. And this has taken a number of incarnations to learn how to drive the vehicle. And driving the vehicle is learning how to deal with emotions in spite of the fact that our whole society, the world as it is at the moment, is geared towards developing and magnifying our sense of fear, so that we go day to day in a fearful state. And we can see that today, in terms of, if you listen to the news, it's always fear-mongering. Politicians fear-mongering, the so-called health fear-mongering. Even food has become an issue for fear-mongering. Everything is fear-mongering. And this is not new. There was always fear. Usually before there was fear of brutality. Now brutality is not so much on the surface, but fear is there from the state, from the rules and the regulations, from the fact that you don't have money to pay the bills. So then there's that fear, that anxiety when the next letter comes through the post. there are many ways in which fear can overtake us. It didn't used to be that way. Prior to the last catastrophe, the last cataclysm, the Atlantis times, before the Kali Yuga effect took hold of us on this earth, people did not live in a state of fear. And the movement of the soul in a human being was very quick before moving on somewhere else. Nowadays, we're stuck. We're stuck in this planet. We're stuck with fear and all its ramifications. The difference is that many of us have been through many incarnations and we've learned about fear. Our souls have learned about fear and how to, in spite of the fear, move beyond it. The fear will never go, but how to move beyond it. And this is where we are at the moment. We're born into this world, and from a very early age, we are not infected because it is part of our organism, but we are subjected. We are subjected to the rules, to the regulations, how to behave, and to the fear-mongering. And our parents, and their parents, and their parents, everybody has been indoctrinated, everybody has been subdued, controlled, and then they're all damaged, and then we come along and we are subjected to the same. The difference is that the more incarnations we've had, the more experience we have, and the quicker we can grow upwards and control that emotional expression within us, the more that we can learn to separate from the fear-mongering and to come to our senses, to who we are. However, that process takes its toll on the human body. And the suppressed emotions in us can lead to physical illness. And human beings are susceptible to two different types of physical illness. One is as a result of eating the wrong foods, which has been in vogue now for nearly 150 years, increasingly so. And the other one is through emotions, emotional suppression. Those are two major sources of illness. And physical illness can also be forced on us. Sounds a bit odd. We need to wake up. Okay, so we come onto this world as it is right now, totally fucked up. And our souls are ready to move on. But the suppression on our psyches, and because of the Kali Yuga, which is still there, or has been there, it's not there anymore this year, but it has been there, it's been suppressing everybody. And whilst that has now lifted, we still carry all that trauma. And in preparation for what is now happening, those of us who've been here a few years, we needed to expedite the waking up to essence, not the waking up to the political landscape or all those things are important, but to wake up to essence. That means dealing with the backlog within us, which we've already picked up through our childhood years growing up. And no one is given more than they can deal with. So there come moments in one's life when we have accidents which will make us ill for some reason or other. Sometimes it's the result purely of emotion. That certainly be my case in my life, but I know of many others who they've suffered accidents, which as a result it becomes the wake up. I want to heal myself. I don't know how to do this. So a search begins, and it puts the person into a search for something more. And that becomes the gateway towards moving towards self-understanding. And so they begin to explore different religions, different philosophies. The end result is always in the same direction, because the end result is never outwards, it's always inwards. Because the truth of self is always found inside us, not outside us. So emotions affect the body. Or should I say, unexpressed emotions affect the body. In my case, I'd come to the UK, 11 years old. I was in a totally alien space, didn't speak the language. I was away from my safety zone. I didn't really know anybody, not even my mother, who I ended up living with. And I was totally isolated. I was bullied at school. I felt no confidence, really, a loss in myself. And the tension inside me became unbearable, physically. And it affected my lower back, and the joints between my hips and my femur went, both legs. And I ended up in hospital with an operation in each leg, and I ended up with pins which I have to this day. And through that experience, I began to change. I was always different from everybody else, but I really began to change and became curious, and things with other children were not curious about. And that took me so far. And then much later on, my little boy, after a couple of years, I had to leave the relationship because it was an unbearable relationship. I didn't want to leave him. He was like me when I was a little boy. I was put in an orphanage. I didn't want him to suffer like that. And I just couldn't bear it. But I had to go because I couldn't stay with her, and I couldn't bear for him to experience what was going on between the two of us. So I left, and every night for 6 months I cried myself to sleep. Then I said, I've got to stop crying. Of course, that crying during those 6 months, it wasn't really healthy crying. It was victim crying. But I stopped crying, and that was even worse. My body began to seize up. And then I spent the next 20 years exploring all manner of healing modalities to help myself. And, no one else could actually help me, because the causes were not physical. The causes were emotional. And it was dealing with my emotions, with my suppressed emotions, that eventually helped me to heal, to truly heal. And meanwhile, I went to all manner of people, even alternative therapists of all sorts. I did everything. I became a therapist. I became an acupuncturist. I learned so much, but none of it actually helped, because I needed to deal with those emotions, and I didn't have the tools to truly help myself. I did get help along the way in different ways, but there were the core of my shadow, the real painful emotions from my childhood, to do with grief, to do with anger, to do with self-worth, to do with love, to opening my heart to love. All of that I had to claw my way into. I had to really fight for that. And that meant experiencing a lot of emotional intensity, which had been suppressing me from the word go in my childhood. And I had to release the emotional tension from my body. And that required a lot of awareness. It meant to... I've got a video on YouTube to do with how to help yourself with this particular bit, which I learned the hard way, which is that we need to go into our bodies, we need to connect with the muscles which are tense, and we need to relax and let go, and we need to release, we need to allow whatever emotion is there. It's not that we need to, it's that we need to open up and allow whatever's inside us to express itself. Because emotions, when they're unexpressed, they are kept in stasis within the muscles of our bodies. So we now have emotional tension. We've got muscular tension. So for example, if I say my arm, if I go like that, I've just contracted my bicep, okay? To contract my bicep, my tricep needs to relax. If I want to extend my arm, I need to relax my bicep as my tricep contracts to create a balance. So there's a homeostasis between the two. When emotions create muscular spasm of the, this is a voluntary, part of the voluntary muscle. But we've got a lot of involuntary muscles around our spine, around our internal organs, to do with the diaphragm, for example, to do with breathing. We have a lot of muscles which they're designed to maintain the function of our body. We don't have to think about it. They work in spite of whether we think about it or not. And these muscles will go into, some of those muscles will go into spasm. And because we have these emotions that we don't experience at the time, and they keep getting triggered, the muscle contracts and stays contracted. Because the signal for the opposing muscle to relax has stopped being... The muscle keeps contracting, and the signal that comes from the central unit in the brain telling the opposing muscle to contract so that the initial contraction relaxes, after a while it stops. And the brain stops sending the signal, so now the muscle is in spasm. When you say I got lower back pain, it means you've got muscles which are in a continuous state of contraction, and the opposing muscle is not getting the message to relax. the brain stops sending, it's like it's not listening. Just like when with smell. If you get something that has a strong pungent smell, you smell it, after about 10 seconds you can't smell it anymore. The brain has stopped sending the signal. It doesn't want to hear it anymore because it's got a million other things to think about. It cannot focus on that. So that's what we do with emotions, that we don't experience the emotion, it becomes suppressed in the muscles, the brain stops sending the signal to the opposing muscle to encourage that one to relax. And so 2 months, 2 years, however long, those muscles remain in spasm. How do you relax a muscle that's in spasm like that? Well, you can go to people to massage if you're lucky, and you may find someone who really knows, but some of those muscles you can hardly get to. But you can do it with yourself. You can actually relax into your body, connect to that muscle that is in spasm, and gradually the better you become at making that connection, suddenly a moment comes when the brain hears that. The brain hears that muscle's in spasm, and it sends the signal to the opposing muscle to contract, and then that muscle that's in spasm will relax. I know. And then the pain will go. Now, I really encourage you guys who listen to me to chase this video and learn how to do this for yourselves, because this is part of growth. This is part of how to relax the emotional tensions within our body, which you need to be able to deal with the suppressed emotions. The two go together. It's hard to separate the two. So you need to connect with that initial emotion, but you also need to learn to relax the body. If the body is too armored, you don't stand a chance. Most people, the involuntary muscles which are related to the heart, they affect the vertebrae opposite at the back of the heart, about, I think it's number 7, thoracic 7. So there's a number of them, and they are so spasmodic, that's the word, they're in such a state of spasm that if you go to an osteopath, he won't even go there, because there's no point. You're so armored, there's so much tension, that there's no point attempting to release those bones and those tissues and those muscles. You can't do it. There's just so much deep tension in the unconscious, coming from the unconscious, that there's no point. And so there is a process. So we acknowledge, we come into this world and we pretty quickly become inundated with suppressed emotions of one sort or another. That's just the beginning of the story. Next time I'll come on to the mind. But so you've got all that, and you now become aware. You start to become aware of yourself. Step number 1, self-awareness. You start to become aware of yourself. You start to become aware of your body. You start to become aware you've got pains. And now you start to become aware how reactive you are in the world in certain circumstances with people. So part of the process is becoming aware. Look, I keep having these relationships with people and they all go pear-shaped. Whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's with friends. I'm totally lonely in myself, I'm totally lost. There's a whole caboodle of things, but we start to become aware that we're not right, and that's the beginning of it. And it's important, because how else are we going to change? How else are we going to change what's happening within us? So we start to become, and the more often we become aware like this, the clearer it becomes. And then we start to realize, I've got these tensions. I'm always reacted in this way emotionally. And so gradually we start this process, which hopefully now will accelerate because there is less pressure on us. And so we need to learn to recognize that if I get a crink in my neck, I go to the osteopath. Hold on a minute. Sit down. What's happened yesterday? What happened the day before? What happened last night? What happened this morning? Something happened. You had an interchange with someone and you had an emotional experience that you were not able to process. You reacted in some way instinctively. And that gave rise to the pain. You had a muscle that went into spasm, an involuntary muscle, because of that experience. So you've just heard this from me, and I'm sorry it's taken 26 minutes to get to this point, but this is what you need to do in your life. You need to become aware whenever a pain appears in your body, what has happened over the last few days? Has there been an emotional altercation of some sort that has brought this pain, that is responsible for this pain? I mean, I say this pain, it could be anywhere in your body. Yeah. Muscular pains do not come out of nowhere. And this is how we learn. So we learn to become more savvy about our emotions as they affect our bodies. Because those are the emotions which our shadow, our unconscious, is being projecting into the environment, and we react to them. And the result of that reaction is physical. You know what? I'm going to stop there. It reminds me of therapy. Whenever I used to go for therapy, the real stuff always came 5 minutes before it was time to finish. So anyway, I'm going to stop there, and I'll come back and I'll keep this dialogue. There's so much more to talk on the subject. Bye for now. All the best.